US is supporting Israel, whatever it is doing, and actually imposing any implementation through the Security Council. So that's the major problem today. In respect of a particular group, to destroy it, eliminate it, either fully or partly, and it is coupled with acts of killing, causing harm to the body, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life, of starvation, or imposing any measures which prevents births in that group. That the leaders of the Israeli government have spoken about annihilation of Palestinians. The acts which are going on now, coupled with the so-called intention that can be proved, it would constitute genocide. But that is a matter of proof.
The situation in the Middle East has created a lot of questions and concerns, including most recently at the BRICS summit, where even the Indian Prime Minister had raised issues regarding humanitarian concerns. But the big question that we're asking today is how the international law defines what is happening. I'm being joined by Senior Advocate and UN Special Rapporteur on Health, Mr. Anand Grover. Sir, thank you very much for speaking to India today on this issue. Sir, what we want your perspective on is the legalities and how the situation is developing. How does international law really define genocide, and how is the political situation with Israel and Palestine, the question of action and intent, how is that being defined?
Well, the Genocide Convention defines what is genocide. And basically, what you have in the Genocide Convention is if a particular group is targeted with intent to destroy it, either wholly or partly, whether that group is ethnic group, racial group, religious group, etc. And there are certain acts carried out. So there has to be intent first in respect of a particular group to destroy it, eliminate it, either fully or partly, and it is coupled with acts of killing, causing harm to the body, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life, of starvation, or imposing any measures which prevents births in that group, or forcibly transferring children, and things like that. So that is what constitutes genocide. So it's actually an intention. There has to be an intention, which is very important. Without the intention, you cannot claim it is genocide.
Okay. So in this situation that we are seeing in the Middle East, according to you, is Israel in violation of the International Convention Against Genocide? And on the other side, Israel is saying that it is Hamas and Iran which are responsible for attempted genocide and war crimes.
Well, there's a case going on mounted by South Africa in the International Court of Justice, which is precisely on this issue. So they have argued that there is intention, as is evidence from the fact that certain senior officers of the Israeli government have actually spoken about getting rid of the Palestinians, and coupled with the acts of war, which actually have destroyed so many people in terms of killing children and over 30,000-40,000 Palestinians, that actually constitutes genocide. Now, the International Court was seized of the matter, and it gave a preliminary ruling saying that there is a plausible case of genocide, what we call prima facie in India, a plausible case of genocide. And it also gave further orders last year for cessation of those, including, for example, preventing food getting in, etc. Now, so there is a plausible case of genocide, and I think a case can be made out, and South Africa has mounted a correct challenge. insofar as Hamas is concerned, the 7th October uh, incident where large number of people were actually captured and destroyed, and coupled with their charter, as they say, their aim of destroying Israel is also a plausible case of genocide. Both have to be condemned politically, but legally, that's the issue. But as far as Iran is concerned, it'll be a difficult task to say that they are committing genocide. They may be complicit in Hamas's ventures, but directly it will be very difficult to either argue or even prove.
So, if since you've mentioned the ICJ and the South Africa and this case that South Africa and other countries have mounted, the case began in. It's been going on for a while. The Office of the Prosecutor had taken certain steps. The Office of the Prosecutor, sorry, that is the ICC. We've seen both ICC and ICJ. In
Yes.
2024, the ICJ has International Court of Justice had given a ruling, as you just mentioned, but they had simply asked Israel to take all measures within its power to prevent commission of acts prohibited by the Genocide Convention. We've seen further escalations since then. We've seen what several experts are calling violation of the genocide conventions, violation of the Geneva Convention since then. How do you see the last year or so of developments that have been going on in the Middle East?
Well, there have been so many killings of Palestinians after the 7th October 23, killing of Israelis and capturing hostages. Now, the problem is actually, though this is going on and it actually is a plausible case of genocide, the International Court of Justice can only give a ruling and pass orders for cessation, but it doesn't have the power to implement it. For that purpose, that order has to be actually implemented by the UN. Now, the UN General Assembly they can pass resolutions, but they're not effective orders. That has to be done by the Security Council, which comprises 15 permanent members. And in that Security Council, all those members have a veto. And the US has been vetoing everything. That is one. So there's a problem in the structure of the UN system itself. So even if the International Court of Justice passes a ruling finally saying that there is genocide and certain people are actually committed that, to implement it or to execute it has to be done ultimately by the UN Security Council. Unless it is unanimous, it cannot be done. That is one. The problem now is also politically. The US is supporting Israel, whatever it is doing, and actually imposing any implementation through the Security Council. So that's the major problem today. Even if it goes on, and even if the ICJ passes an order, it will not be implemented if the permanent member of the Security Council vetoes it. And that's a structural problem within the UN. And in fact, India has been highlighting all these issues without much avail of in terms of change.
If we also speak about the ICC, the International Criminal Court, we've seen the Office of the Prosecutor conducting a preliminary inquiry. We've seen the Office of the Prosecutor seeking arrest warrants against both Benjamin Netanyahu, the Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense of Israel, but also against Hamas leaders and multiple Hamas leaders, including Yahya Sinwar himself. But when we saw the preliminary order being passed by the pre-trial chamber, then we saw massive opposition, we saw political maneuvering and diplomatic maneuvering, and then the appeals chamber just a few months ago sent this issue back to the pre-trial chamber. How do you analyze the developments in the ICC, what the Office of the Prosecutor is doing, what the pre-trial chamber order, and what the appeals chamber has said?
The issue today internationally is the breakdown of a rules-based order, because though countries have actually signed up to these conventions, they are preventing them from being implemented. That's what's happened. Now, you have to understand the difference between the ICJ and the International Criminal Court. The ICJ actually does adjudicate cases against states, whereas the prosecution is launched by the International Criminal Court. So Warrants were sought by the prosecutor against the people you have mentioned. They were granted, and the appeal chamber has actually turned them upside down and remanded them back to the original body. Now, the problem, as I said, is a breakdown of the rules-based order. Like, for example, in India, suppose a court passes an order that so-and-so person should be arrested, and the police doesn't arrest it, and then contempt action is issued. Now, if they don't comply with that, and the court does nothing, what will happen? It's a breakdown of order, a rules-based order. So countries which are supposed to actually implement them, they're using their powers, and that's a structural problem, as I alluded to earlier, in the Security Council to prevent these things from being executed. So there's a major problem in terms of political and diplomacy. That's a question for governments to negotiate. Now, India has taken certain stands. Historically, we always align with Palestine. The government, over a period of time, has become closer to Israel. I'm not commenting on that. That's a political question. But in terms of law also, because India, if it's positioning itself and aligning itself with Israel for economic, political reasons, it has to now negotiate itself to decide how to actually not disobey, as it were, a rules-based order. So that's why we have been seeing shifts in the approach of India and the resolutions that have been passed in the UN General Assembly, which is a cause of serious concern because we should be actually clearly supporting, in my personal opinion, uh, not the Hamas's strategy of taking people hostage, but the general struggle of Palestinians to have their own independent state. I think India is still committed to that, but we have to be able to negotiate it properly.
So, are we effectively seeing a hollowing out really of the international courts, especially as you mentioned, the US vetoing UN Security Council decisions, the US government even taking the step of barring entry of ICC judges, prosecutor, and other officials, the ICJ also under criticism. Is there any working mechanism or a workable mechanism under international law to
Whatever
deal with the
mechanism
issue
is
as
there,
it is?
sorry, whatever mechanism has been put in place by the ICJ and the International Criminal Court is, as you rightly say, hollowed out. And it is under severe attack. There's a severe problem and a crisis of the international legal order in terms of making people accountable for acts of genocide, war crimes, or crimes against humanity. Unfortunately, the state which actually sponsored these conventions, for example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is actually Eleanor Roosevelt's baby, as it were, are not only not complying with them, but as you rightly say, they are issuing sanctions against judges, against the prosecutor, and now against the UN Special Rapporteur, Albanese, who is the rapporteur on Palestine and has been reporting very well on what is happening and telling us what is the truth. And now it's all on television, whether it's Indian television or British television. Everything that's happening every day, how many people are being killed. Now, those people are actually being sanctioned. So it's not only a hollowing out, it's a severe crisis. There's no international order to make persons accountable for their criminal actions today. That is a major problem.
So, if I may then take your opinion, how do you see India's stance on the Israel-Palestine issue? Because India has been talking about humanitarian aid. India has been talking about the need for restoring peace, but India has not signed the UN resolution that was condemning Israel. At the same time, how do you see the stance taken so far by the UN, especially the Western countries? You've mentioned what the US is doing multiple times. The UN itself passed a resolution condemning Israel, but nothing has actually been done. No specific steps, no, I mean, what exactly are the steps that the international community can take in a situation like this?
Uh, First of the steps that the International Committee can take, as I said, the UN General Assembly can pass a resolution. They passed a resolution. Sometimes India voted for it, sometimes India abstained, etc. Now, the the problem with the structure under the UN Charter is that even if the UN General Assembly passes a resolution, it cannot be implemented because it has to be actually acceded to by the Security Council, which comprises 15 permanent members. Any one of them can veto it. It's like having a parliament where the parliament passes a law, but then there is a group of elder statesmen, as it were, who decide whether it should be implemented or not. And any one of them can say, sorry, we are not going to allow the law to be passed, finally. So this is a structural problem. The second issue is political. That the Western countries have been supporting Israel, whether they actually commit a crime of genocide or not. That's a political thing. Only of late, they have started shifting their stand, and the British Parliament actually passed a resolution saying that Israel cannot stop aid going in. But that's a very small shift. The main thing is hostilities must stop, and Palestine must be allowed to build. The Western nations, if I may say so, have been hypocritical about it. You can talk about genocide in Rwanda. They talk about human rights, but when human rights are violated, as they are in Palestine, they don't do anything. Only now there's a slight shift, but not sufficient. Uh, the US position is very clear. In fact, they are supplying arms to to Israel. They have a very close relationship. So people have been arguing that they are complicit in what Israel is doing. India's position is much more complex because India has historically supported Palestine. And over a period of time, even with the earlier government, there was association with Israel, which has now fructified into a more closer relationship. In fact, even arms are purchased from Israel. So India has actually been talking about peace, etc., but they have neither condemned, uh, they have not condemned any either party's attacks, which is unfortunate. I believe that if you are a friend of somebody, you should tell that person, you know, and whether you do it publicly or not, that's a different question. There are people who, like Mandela, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, who believed in truth. They took a very clear stand on these issues. India has not done it because of the geopolitical situation, and now with the economy changing so rapidly internationally, there are very delicate issues. So India is actually trying to, ride a very difficult road, as it were, trying to make sure that they don't condemn either of the parties. But the stand is visible. But the latest resolution passed with the BRICS, I think it's better than earlier um, stances. So we have to take a stand which is more clear and unequivocal. But that's a political issue. That's not for me as a lawyer to comment.
So, if we come back to the legalities of it all, what liabilities does a government or people found guilty of genocide face? What kind of action can be taken against them? And what, according to you, what kind of legal action is possible against Israel? What about Hamas? What about Iran?
Well, as I said earlier, Iran is a very difficult stance because you can't pinpoint them in committing genocide. At the most, they would be, and there has to be proof to show that they're complicit. In terms of Hamas, if it exists, how will you, even an order is passed, how will you actually implement it? Because they have no money, as it were, of their own. But if the International Court of Justice decides finally, and normally these things take about 3-4 years minimum, then we had Rwanda and Serbia, etc. But there, whatever was decided, because the international community was one with all these cases. Now, if even if it decides hypothetically that A has committed genocide, and if it is a state, it can be like any other court order. It can be actually held guilty of a particular act. Then you can pass an order for cessation, for reparations, financial compensation, etc., etc. You can do all those things. But again, how will you implement it? You have to go back to the UN General Assembly. Security Council will be impeding it if the Security Council members don't want it. So again, you come back to square one. That is the crisis in the rules-based order internationally. So we are in a very, very bad situation, not only internationally, even nationally. In certain countries, things are not being implemented. You know, the lawmakers decide, the courts turn it down. There's so many issues like that. Like the law is being changed in the US every now so often, and nobody knows with certainty what the law is going to be tomorrow.
So, coming back to the legalities of international law, if you could just take our viewers once more through what actions are considered genocide, and in your opinion, as a lawyer, in the last 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, what has happened in the Middle East, which actions are, according to you, fall within the definitions of genocide?
If it is provable that the leaders of the Israeli government have spoken about annihilation of Palestinians, the acts which are going on now, coupled with the so-called intention that can be proved, it would constitute genocide. But that is a matter of proof. And the South African government has actually put forward a huge amount of proof for that purpose. But that could be, and even if it is shown that Hamas's intention, because Hamas's intention keeps changing, it's a motley group of militants or whatever, and their intentions, coupled with the act of 7th October 2023, it could be argued that it's an act of genocide. It could be argued. But that's on a very weak footing compared to the Israeli complicity in the cases.
So, if we could analyze what South Africa's proof, the arguments that South Africa has put before the ICJ, the information that we as people following these developments is, which actions are you, can you specify, if you can cite a couple of examples of that, what the Genocide Convention says, what the specific clauses of the Genocide Convention say, and how a certain action on the ground connects to that?
So, as I said earlier, the Genocide Convention requires to show that the perpetrator has in fact tried to eradicate, annihilate the whole of a particular community or a part of it by certain acts, by killing, torturing, etc. Now, with, very importantly, intention to do so. The intention is the most important in genocide as compared to, say, war crimes or crimes against humanity. War crimes are limited to actions in war which are egregious acts against civilians. Crimes against humanity are not connected with war. But genocide has a specific element which has to be appreciated, and that is there has to be an intention to annihilate or get rid of a particular group, and that it's coupled with acts which are of that time. So if you can show that there was intention by speeches of the Prime Minister and other people, the acts which have been followed by Israel, killing civilians, okay, children, women, civilians, then that would constitute genocide. Israel says that these people are actually masked terrorist Hamas support, not only supporters, they're active Hamas militants. Now, how can you show that 30,000 or more who have been killed, including children in hospitals, are those? So those acts, coupled with the intention, if it is proved, may constitute genocide on the part of Israel.
All right, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Anand Grover, for speaking to India today and giving us this legal perspective, not just on what is happening in Israel and Palestine, but also the issue of how international law and international community do not seem to be doing what the UN was made to do. In New Delhi, this is Aneesha Mathur for India Today Global.